It is draft season, folks. We're looking at quarterback needy teams at the top of the NFL draft. Could the Bears be one of those teams? Of course, it's the Texans and the Colts and the Panthers and the Titans. Who could be moving around? What could they be looking for? All that and more on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Oh, I love draft season, Matt. And it goes along. We have the combine next week. It's just it's so fun, and I love the different angles and the different prospects, and almost every prospect in the draft. Talking, number one overall, all the way down to 262, Mr. Irrelevant, who turned out to be a very interesting prospect.
Your guy, yeah.
Right, and Brock Purdy. So you got to pay attention to all of them. But there's something, even the guys that go undrafted, there's something you could love about every single prospect in the draft. And then there's something you can point to and be like, I don't know. And it's the eye of the beholder. It's the team. It's who watches what games. And it's all so fun, and they're all built different. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. So I want to talk about those quarterbacks today and the teams specifically that might be looking at those quarterbacks and how this might all look in the top 10 or 11 picks in the NFL draft and maybe even a little bit later in the draft. But Matt, what really got my interest going on this topic for this episode specifically, there's a few things. One question in the mailbag that was that we didn't get to on this week's mailbag episode, but also that the Carolina Panthers are in a super interesting spot to me because they're outside of being in control of their destiny in the draft at pick number 9. But they're clearly a team that needs a quarterback. And rarely do you get this much insight from inside of a building as you are going to get for the Carolina Panthers this year, because their recently hired quarterbacks coach, Josh McCown, has YouTube videos with Josh Norris that talk about the quarterback prospect. He's breaking them down, and he's not the GM, he's not the head coach, but I would say third in line after, maybe the scouting director and the GM and the head coach. He's going to be watching all these guys, and he's going to have big opinions on these guys, and that opinion is going to weigh heavily in the Panthers draft room. And you can go watch videos of Josh McCown breaking down, get his exact thoughts on CJ Stroud and Bryce Young in this draft.
Very interesting. First of all, I know that McCown is very well thought of, and the league views him as a future head coach. And Houston considered hiring him last year as a head guy. He just didn't really have the experience, and it wasn't a real good look, to be honest with you. So he's not just Joe average, quarterback turned coach. I mean, I think he has a long-term future in this line of work. My immediate thoughts were, boy, Williamson, you're old. You're not even on Instagram. I have I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, but I mean, I'm not very social media sound. I'm, getting old up there, and I don't care that much. But I wonder, it reminded me of the Sean Payton situation. Like when he was unemployed, he's basically just talking to the media as a media person. Are we going to see a lot of this sort of stuff coming up? Like coach takes a year off, has a YouTube page or whatever, and tells you real things.
The closest thing I can think of was back in the 2018 draft when Scott McCloughan was hired on as the Cleveland Browns consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was somewhat late in the process after he had already gone through and talked about a lot of these prospects. And if you paid attention to Scott McCloughan, who's a former GM in the league and has been a really good scout and is well thought of and had some problems with different things, which is why he's not a GM in the league. But he loved Baker Mayfield. But Baker Mayfield at the time wasn't thought of as a number 1 overall pick. If people are like, he's kind of small. What do we do with this guy? Maybe he's a late 1. Maybe he's even an early 2. But, he's kind of climbing. And then Scott McCloughan gets hired on. And all of a sudden you go back and you look, it's like, oh, well, he loved him. Like number 1 overall in the draft type stuff. And guess what? He ends up going number 1 overall in the draft. So you could probably get some clues from at least Josh McCown. And again, not the GM, but those you'll know how some people in the building feel about him. And I wonder if that was part of the conversations of when he was hired, if that's all lockstep with what already Frank Reich and Fitterer, who's been doing this already as the GM and been scouting these guys for a while, already think about some of these quarterback prospects. And so that seems like it could be a pretty natural plan for the Panthers to be aggressive going up. The question is now, do they have to go up to 1? Can they go up to 3? Can they go up to 6? How high do you have to go if you're the Panthers?
Yeah, that's interesting because as you open the show, they don't really control their destiny. I mean, from ownership down, I view them as a very aggressive organization. I don't think ownership would be like, can't go up to 1, or can't go up to 2. I think that they would get the stamp of approval from the most important people that own the place, that if you love them, go do it. I mean, that's great. I can't kind of reveal my sources, but I do have a good inkling that Carolina would very much like to do exactly that. A first-round quarterback mixed with, I always say, the Trubisky Pickett move. Somebody that has a little bit of a track record, that had some pedigree that basically failed, mixed with a first-round pick. I mean, and maybe it's Brissett, who played really well last year, or Mayfield, or, whoever. But I think that's the move they want to try to pull off this year, is sign somebody that has a little bit of a history, that has some talent, see if they can resurrect that, and then draft a guy. And from where they sit, I think that's a great plan. I mean, that's exactly the move I would try to pull off too. Can they do it? Who knows?
Can they do it even not knowing where they're going to be in the draft? Maybe they have to stick at 9. Maybe they can't really get up. And is there going to be a player there for them at 9? And there's a number of quarterback prospects, and maybe Anthony Richardson. Maybe Richardson ends up going first. I have no idea what this is going to end up looking like, because the combine might have some say, and there might be some teams that fall in love with certain attributes and fall out of love with other prospects due to the same thing. And you're saying basically the Panthers more like, instead of spending $30 million on a quarterback, they're spending $10 million on a quarterback because they hope he doesn't have to play a lot, because they want the rookie to be ready to go probably early in his career.
Yeah, and have a cheap quarterback room for the for foreseeable future. Maybe you catch lightning in the bottle, and the Trubisky type guy turns into a really good player, and you have 2 good ones, and you can trade one or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a good route to go, because it's not crazy expensive. It probably wouldn't be that expensive to get from 9 to 5 or whatever as well. And I'm sure how they'll judge it too is, okay, we're at 9. Can we live with all 4 of those quarterbacks? Like if one of the 4 is there, can we take them, or do we only like 3? Do we only like 1? And then in addition to that, are there 4 others or 5 other football players, not quarterbacks, that, well, if we get screwed out of our favorite 4, well, we're going to end up with Will Anderson, and we're just fine with that. You know what I mean? So they'll do a little bit of quick math too. And my hunch is 9 isn't going to cut it. I think you have to get ahead of the Raiders and some of those type of teams.
And we kind of went through this in 2021, and some teams held their water. Some teams went up. Some teams waited to draft day to go up. And it turned out that there was quarterbacks that kind of slid a little bit. And so it's not impossible that at least one of the top 4 guys could be there at 9. And
I think there's a good chance.
There's a tier break after the top 4 quarterbacks being Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, and Anthony Richardson. Depending on Anthony Richardson could be the number 1 guy on some boards. Some teams did not have a first round grade on him. That if they're okay with all of them, maybe hanging back is the way to go. And then after 2 of them are gone, or after 3 of them are gone, then you make a move.
Yeah.
So we'll see what that ends up looking like for the Panthers. But yeah, if I'm doing a mock draft, which I will be pretty soon for one of these mock draft Mondays coming up, not this week, but probably post combine, I'm gonna have the Panthers moving up. I just think that's it feels like that's what's going to happen. And especially after the top 4 picks, there will be at least 2 quarterbacks gone, and probably teams like the Seahawks and the Lions would not be opposed to moving down, especially only 4 or 5 spots. And it could go up there. It just seems logical that that's the way this draft is going to go.
So a couple things I'm not going to fight you on, but I mean, ideally it'd be great to sit there and wait till there's 5 picks in the books and then move to 6 or whatever.
Right.
But as you know better than anyone, recent history shows these teams that want a quarterback are making pre-draft deals. I think the timing of all of this is very interesting too. Like going back to the Wentz Goff year, those guys didn't have the first 2 picks in the draft. I mean, the Rams and Eagles made several trades for the Eagles. They moved from, I forget where, 20 to 9 to 2 or whatever, all well before the draft. Your Niners are the best example ever. They go up to 2 well before the draft, and we didn't even know who they liked. You know what I mean? At the time.
And then it turned out to not be a great move. It's like, well,
right.
At least finish the evaluation process before you move up to number 3 overall and spend 3 first-round picks. But if you're willing to do that for the certainty, especially if you're able to go up to number 1, like if the Panthers strike that deal before the draft because they like one guy more than everybody else and they know they have to move up anyway, it's like, well, let's just go get it done and let's go up to number 1 with the Bears.
They seem like an antsy organization. I always kind of make fun of them. There's a new shiny object. Let's go get that. Let's do that. They're kind of a new, they're not an old school stagnant ownership, obviously. And I wonder, are they chomping at the bit right now? Like, I don't want somebody to move up to 1 or 2. We should do it now. Right. The patience here could be really important. But do you really want to do that before the combine? I mean, like you want some information here first.
Yeah, it just seems like the combine will probably get a lot of this kick started, and then it's pro day season after that. And everyone's together at the combine, a lot of conversations. It seems like a really good time for some of these trade conversations.
Oh, without question.
Ramp up. And especially if you're just checking off boxes at the combine, right? We think he's this physically. Let's check those boxes off and then confirm that. Then let's go get a guy. And if for the Panthers, not only are there numerous teams in front of you that could draft a quarterback, there's teams behind you like the Titans that could jump you if you want to wait till 5 or 6 to try to make your move. And there's no guarantee if you like 2 of the guys more than anybody else, there's no guarantee that one of those guys will even be there at 3 to try to make that move.
Right.
Going up to 3 might be just as expensive as going up to 1.
Yeah. I think that's a possibility this year because these quarterbacks are eye of the beholder for sure. Richardson epitomizes that. Levis isn't far off, where I could see half the team saying they're not first rounders. Their tape is questionable. Or, half the quarterback coach is saying, boy, give me that guy. I just want to work with him. I see Josh Allen, so there will be very different thoughts on this because there isn't an Andrew Luck that everybody knows is going first overall. Maybe deep down that is Bryce Young, but they want to see his body first, and let me at least see him at Indy and see how big he really is and all that.
Yeah. Does he show up? I know he's been drinking protein shakes. Does he show up at 6 feet, 200? Or is he 5'10" and a half, 190? Right. It could be a big difference on draft boards. It could be disqualifying.
Does he look bloated like he's going to really play at 175? Like he's
right.
What's he look like?
Up his pro day at 185 again and lose all the 10 pounds that he gained eating peanut butter every hour. Okay, more specifically on Bryce Young, the other quarterback prospects, what the Bears could do at number 1 next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's the midway point of the NBA season now, and it's the perfect time to download FanDuel because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. I love the app. I love how easy it is to do everything and navigate the app and make your bets and build your own parlays. And you can bet on everything from money line to point scorers in an NBA game, threes drained. Of course, the college tourney's coming up. MLB season is coming. NHL season is in the same point just about that the NBA season is right now. And of course, you can still bet on the NFL as well. Draft props, future Super Bowl winners, future league MVPs, and of course, combine those bets for a bigger chance of a payout with the same game parlays. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Quick reminder, hit that subscribe button on the brand new Peacock and Williamson YouTube page. We have our own YouTube channel now. We're not on the Locked On NFL channel anymore. Might be a few episodes still there, but pretty soon it's going to be just the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show YouTube channel. YouTube.com/@Peacock and Williamson is where you can find it. Make sure you are subscribed up, even if you don't watch YouTube all that often. Matt, I want to talk about Bryce Young.
Okay.
I want to talk Bryce Young. I want to talk about the first pick overall with the Chicago Bears, the decision they had. I want to go really quick to, and this is player comparison season too. And draft nicks and analysts get killed because of their comparisons. Todd McShay compared Bryce Young to Patrick Mahomes. And it's just like that. You can't go to the Patrick Mahomes. I get what you're saying, off-platform stuff, creating. I get it. And, and it's never a perfect likeness when you do these comps, but some comps you just can't make. And I think the Mahomes one has to be pretty much retired. I've seen Bryce Young compared to Steph Curry. Nate Tice recently of The Athletic compared Bryce Young to Doug Flutie because of his size. And Dane Brugler, who is The Athletic's draft analyst, does a great job there. Everybody should follow him at DP Brugler on Twitter. He added this note to Bryce Young and just how far outside the norm Bryce Young might be as a prospect to go number 1 overall. Of the 301 quarterbacks drafted in the last 25 years, only 2, and we're not talking about first-round picks, we're talking about all quarterbacks drafted, over 300 of them for the last 25 years, only 2 were under 6 feet tall and under 200 pounds.
Wow. But
And
Kyler's over 200 pounds.
Yes, Kyler's built differently than Bryce.
Right.
He's thicker, even though he's not tall. And neither one of those 2 players were drafted in the top 100 picks. The pool of physical comparisons for Bryce Young is tiny, Doug Flutie being one of the few that actually historically fits in that size range. So it would be a really wild outlier for Bryce Young to go not only number 1 overall to be a great NFL starting quarterback. It's just guys that small haven't traditionally been drafted or being basically even allowed to be, a starting NFL quarterback. Doesn't mean it can't happen. And I think teams are more willing now with smaller quarterbacks. But the physical tools that Bryce Young brings is going to be disqualifying for some teams. And we'll see exactly how tall and exactly how much he weighs. And he might get himself over that. Because look, Matt, you or I, between January 1st and what days the combine start?
I'm going Monday, but I think nothing happens till Wednesday, I think. Is the
okay. So essentially January 1st to March 1st, right? 2 full months. Yeah. You or I could gain 10 pounds very easily.
Could do it in 3 days.
Exactly. Right. Well, if he was legitimately playing at 190, I'd be shocked actually if he's not 200 pounds by the combine. But is that going to be his playing weight? Is that what he's going to be when because he probably won't work out if that's the case. Then if he works out his pro days, he back down to 192 or whatever, and how tall is he? 'Cause I've seen photos of him with CJ Stroud towering over him with actually not looking much taller than Kyler Murray. But it's like, is there camera tricks? One guy's standing behind the other guy. So I'm not really sure. There's a lot of people that think he's 5'10 and a half. But if he's 5'10 and a half, 195, some teams will just flat out not draft him in the first round.
Oh, there's no question. And you said a lot of good stuff there I want to respond to. First of all, one of my pet peeves, especially this time of year, who's he remind you of? Jim Brown, Jerry Rice, Lawrence Taylor, right? Ronnie Lott, come on, and I'm not giving Todd a hard time. Todd's a friend of mine. And Mahomes, my comparison for Mahomes, you might remember, was a mix of Magic Johnson and Sandy Koufax. Well, yes. I think there is some Magic Johnson to Bryce Young, and I think that's what Todd's saying. Spatial awareness, playmaking, distributing, seeing the world differently than most quarterbacks and point guards. But Mahomes is probably off the table. He's in the Jim Brown land now. You can't just say, he reminds me of Lawrence Taylor, But many teams, and I think there's fewer now than 10 years ago for sure. Kennywood's our local park, or Disney. You have to be this big to ride the ride. Like when I recruited at Pitt, we knew when we recruited against Michigan, if the wide receiver wasn't 6'1", he wasn't going to be a Wolverine. He might be a Panther, but if he's 6'1" or bigger, we're going to have to beat Michigan on him. Probably not going to happen. You know what I mean? There's definitely, you have to be this tall to ride the ride or fit these parameters to ride the ride. Like, I know we're not talking tackles, but Skoronski from Northwestern is a tremendous football player. He's an outlier. Bryce Young is an outlier. It's hard to convince people in charge to draft outliers because there's no evidence, to your point, of success that way. Devontae Smith had to be a tough sell for people. He was an outlier. He's worked out. So we'll see. I mean, it wouldn't shock me, and I think mistakes are made this way. I'm not saying that Levis or Richardson are going to be a mistake, but teams are going to have those two over Young on their boards. Some will. It might not matter. It might be a team that doesn't need a quarterback, but some will have the big, strong guys over Young on their board.
I think Aaron Donald's a perfect example because he had top 5, top 1, maybe college tape.
Yeah.
But he didn't fit the size parameters. So he falls out of the top 10. Some teams had a 3rd round grade on Aaron Donald, who was the best defensive player of his generation, him and JJ Watt, right?
He wrecked the Senior Bowl. People forget that. When he went to the Senior Bowl, he was an unbelievable dominant force, you know.
And he was built like Superman, had everything. He just wasn't
right. He's short. Yeah.
Everything he had was just 6'3" instead of 6'1", he would have been probably one of the top 3 picks in the draft.
He's a Jalen Carter prospect, you know, maybe better, you know, right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, no, I mean, Young's going to be very polarizing. I love the Flutie comment, though. I wanted to go to there because if Flutie comes out this year from Boston College, he's a 1st-round pick and somebody thinks he's a starter. I mean, I'm not saying he's better or worse than Young, but I'm not saying he broke the mold, but the chance that the fact that he had any chance to play showed how special he was. You know, he was a great player that just was short, dominated the CFL. I mean, he would be giving more guys like him, Cordell Stewart, you know, they're different, but they would have been given more of a chance to be true quarterbacks now than when they came out.
By the way, can you name those 2 quarterbacks that Dane Brugler is talking about? I think I have an idea of one of them being Joe Hamilton.
Georgia Tech.
From Georgia Tech. Yes, sort of really athletic. He's like 5'10", 180, really small quarterback.
Really good college player, though.
Yes, great college player, but size, you know, he fell to the whatever it was, 4th, 5th round. But played quarterback. There's a lot of smaller quarterbacks that, you know, Antoine Randall L or whatever that had to change positions. But of the ones that stayed quarterback, and I'm just guessing because I don't know who they are, but I think Joe Hamilton has to be one. But I can't think of a Seneca Wallace, maybe.
Wow. That's good. I mean, pulling out Hamilton's pretty impressive to me by you. I don't have time right now, but you can go to drafthistory.com and just sort by quarterbacks. I'm sure we could figure it out. Just look at the last 100 and say maybe this guy, maybe that guy. And you wonder, did any of those guys get Taysom Hilled, you know, and just be like, you're going to be a returner. You're going to end up, you know, you're going to be, you know, it's something else. We're not even going to give you a chance.
One more quick note on Bryce Young before we move on to
Chicago. We got to talk about the Bears. We've been ignoring them a little bit.
Yeah. We got to talk about the Bears and their decision at number 1 as well, and if that might be a bigger consideration for one of the college quarterbacks. But when it comes to Bryce Young, the other thing that nobody's talking about is that he's Alabama quarterback. How many times do we have to see this when your team is better than most of the teams you play against? And the outlier of his size. And he doesn't, not only is he small, he doesn't have Kyler Murray's athleticism or arm. Like he's got good physical attributes as far as arm and his ability to make plays. But you have to really, 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 really trust that from the neck up, this guy's got it and he's a playmaker. And when windows get smaller in the NFL and pass rushers get faster and the guys on the defensive line might be better than your offensive line, and people point to Alabama like, oh, this isn't as good of an Alabama team. They might have the first 2 picks in the draft.
right. They have stars that don't even see the field yet, you know,
They've got a running back that people are starting to talk about as a top 50 pick now, maybe even a first round pick. They've got offensive linemen. They got a defensive lineman. They've got another dozen guys that might get drafted. Like it's just, you know, a half dozen at least. So it's not like this is a poverty franchise all of a sudden at Alabama. This is like
maybe they're behind Georgia. Maybe.
Right. Maybe it's not quite as good as the guys Mac Jones
2 years ago.
And Tua were throwing to. But don't pretend
but history's shown us, BP, if this is a down year for Bama draft class, and like you said, there are 2 guys in the top 5 and maybe top 2. I bet next year's pretty awesome.
That's true. I mean? Right. I'm talking about the juniors that he was throwing to as well. So, and look, you could say the same for Stroud, and it was the same for Justin.
More so for Stroud.
Some of the wide receivers that they were throwing to was like, wow, okay. So that has to be part of the consideration here, and that's the reason why I push back a little bit with Flutie. If he came out now, what would he be doing at Boston College? He's not going to be talked about as the number 1 overall pick, but he might be a guy who's like, man, even though he's small, maybe we should talk about him as a first-round guy, but I think he'd probably still be a day 2 player
right.
At the most, because it's easier at Alabama. And so all of these reasons, I think to myself, can you really trade up? Can you spend 3 first-round picks on what Bryce Young is as a prospect? Because you have to believe wholeheartedly that he is just a special player, processor, playmaker.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Stroud too, because my son, 16, knows more about football than just about any of his buds, as you can imagine. I mean, he's been around for a long time. For some reason, he's an Ohio State fan. I don't know why. He has been since he's tiny. And he asked me like 2 years ago, I think when Fields got drafted, he's like, Dad, has Ohio State ever had a good quarterback in the league? And I'm like, no. I mean, they've had highly drafted guys. None of them are good. And you look at Stroud, he's throwing to Olave and Garrett Wilson, who flat out said Smith-Njigba is better than us his last year. Marvin Harrison's kid, and there's some other dude's going to be a first-round pick too. Like it's even more impressive than Judy, Ruggs, all the Bama dudes that they threw to, and at least Bama dudes are getting chased by SEC defensive linemen and corners, where Big Ten is slow.
All right, let's talk Chicago Bears and their decision at number 1 next. I do want to remind everybody, and thank you again for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So much great content on the network. Your team is covered every single day, but make sure you subscribe to the brand new Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel. Chicago Bears, and this is a longer conversation, so we've kind of like pushed it off, but it's an important conversation to have when it comes to the Chicago Bears and number 1 overall. And shout out to our listener, Michael, who dropped a mailbag question last week to us. And he says, if the Bears have a higher grade on Bryce than they did on Fields coming out, wouldn't it behoove them to at least consider it? And look, there's been some reports recently that they are considering it, but I still think that's more building value and trading the pick than anything else. Here's what I will say is I don't think Bryce Young has a higher grade than Fields did, at least not for me. And maybe he does for some teams, because there's some teams that clearly didn't like Fields because he fell all the way to pick 11 before the Bears traded up to get him. But the Bears were convicted on it. But at the same time, those guys weren't in charge of the Bears at the time.
Right.
So, and Mike, to Michael's point, you absolutely owe it to yourself as a franchise. If you think Bryce Young is better, draft Bryce Young. You have to do that.
I agree. So when the Bears won the first overall pick, Houston wins that game. It's like, okay, I, like everyone else, just thought they're shopping this thing. Good for them. They just acquired a great asset. It's not going to be a quarterback. Oh, that's crazy. They'll give us the lip service. They love Young. They love Stroud, whatever. They're open for business, but blah, 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 blah. But that's short-sighted by me. I mean, if you're in that building, if you were the GM, if I were the GM, to your point, if Young is equal, I'm not sure about, but if he's above Fields, you have to take him. It doesn't matter who it is. I mean, insert rookie quarterback here. If you think he is better or can be better than your guy, you have to take him, because upgrading a quarterback should never be dismissed. I mean, never. I mean, unless you're Mahomes. I mean, I know the Bills aren't in the market for a quarterback, but hey, if it was Pickett, and you like him better, get out. Murray over Rosen, that type of thing. Because in the end, you still would trade Fields. I think you probably get a first-round pick for him, don't you think? Yeah, I mean, you get something good for him, the 15th pick in the draft or something.
You would for sure get a first-round pick for Fields, and so that's part of it as well. And Fields, you've worked with him, but I would go a little further. You would have to be really convicted that, oh, this guy is special, and
I used to think that way.
Too good of a prospect. You can't even say to yourself, he can be better, because Justin Fields can also be better, and he could at the time. And like we're forgetting about how good of a prospect Justin Fields was coming out. If the Jaguars would have taken Justin Fields number 1 if Trevor Lawrence wasn't in that draft, he would have been the number 1 overall pick in that draft. So Justin Fields was kind of different. He was kind of all over the place on a lot of draft boards. But a team realized, just falling out of the top 10, was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. We got to go up and get Justin Fields. And there was other teams that were about to make a similar trade, and the Bears went and got Justin Fields. Justin Fields, to me, has a way better grade. I think it's significantly better grade. And maybe I liked Fields too much, but I'm talking about his arm, his downfield accuracy, his athleticism, 4.4 flat speed, 6'3", 226 pounds. He's just the perfect raw materials for an NFL quarterback, a modern day NFL quarterback. And sure, his time to throw was a little slow in college, played some hero, but like the toughness on top of it. And he did lean a little bit hero ball and had some great receivers to throw to, as we have learned even more recently. But as a prospect coming out, the only thing I could point to is CJ Stroud that might have better is he's a little bit quicker to release the ball and might be better because of it.
He's more accurate.
Short to intermediate area.
Yeah.
Right. But I wouldn't even say accuracy, because the elite
Fields a better thrower than people think.
Fields is an amazing thrower. He had the most tools in that draft class. The throws, and we've seen it in the NFL. He'll make one run and one throw in every single game, and there's a lot of weirdness that happens. And obviously, it's a not very talented team on the Chicago Bears either. There's the worst receiver group of any of the quarterbacks in that class to throw to.
Oh,
he'll make one throw that is elite, NFL elite. I'm talking Mahomes, Josh Allen, Herbert level elite throw in every single Bears game. Like,
yeah,
he
shows up consistently. Yeah,
short to intermediate is the thing you should be able to teach, right? It's like, this is the first read. We're scheming it up, back foot, get the ball out. Like, you should be able to teach that part of it. You can't teach the other stuff that Justin Fields has. And so to me, I'm going to bet on that. And they know how smart he is. They know how hard he works. And if they believe in that, then I'm keeping Justin Fields and I'm trading the pick, especially with all the stuff we talked about with Bryce Young. As good of a prospect as he is, it'd be really hard to look at Bryce Young and say, oh, I will bet my career that this guy is going to be better than Justin Fields. And so that's why in the end, I think you trade the pick and you don't draft Bryce Young. But they owe it to themselves if the answer is we believe this guy will be better than Justin Fields. He's that good. Then you have to draft him.
Yes. And I'm with you. From what I know about these quarterbacks, I would not make the move. I like Fields better. I also have 2 years of NFL tape playing against the Packers and Bears and Lions, or, as opposed to Auburn and LSU, so that's very translatable. Plus all the many, many hours in the building with the human being, so that's unbelievable. You're guessing those things on the rookies. So as it stands right now, I would not make the move. But if I had equal grades on the two, I would, just because you get 2 more years of a cost control guy. The money thing is important. If I can move from 1 to 12, okay, I don't get Jalen Carter, but I get the second corner in the draft, or that to me is worth 2 years cost controlled if they were equal. But right now I'm with you. And I said, when Fields came out, most years he's the first pick in the draft. I still adore him like you do. I would be shocked if Matt Williamson had a better grade on any of these guys than Fields, from what I know about all of them. But especially if I did, I would move it.
Especially a significantly bigger grade.
Right.
Maybe it's tied, or it's just, maybe if they were in the same draft, I might lean this guy, but it's close. It would have to be significant. Like, oh, this is the guy. And
if Trevor Lawrence was in this draft, I'm trading Fields.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue to my last point here when it comes to Bryce Young and the draft and the Bears. And I think you take the page out of the Philadelphia Eagles playbook is you trade the pick. Now you got future picks. Now maybe an even better prospect than both of them. Caleb Williams is in your radar next year if Fields doesn't take the step. But if Fields takes the step, now you've got the extra picks and you got a better football team because of it. So that's the route I would go, is collect future picks, collect more picks, build around the guy you've already started to build around. And if it turns out that Fields is not the guy and you're not a believer, you've got multiple first-round picks next year. You go even get a better prospect potentially. And I think it's going to be a better class at the top at quarterbacks than this year's class. And one more note on Bryce Young and the comps. Okay. Couldn't you just as easily compare Bryce Young to Zach Wilson as you can to Patrick Mahomes? Trick shot artist, off platform. Your team's better than their team. Things look really easy. You make all these plays and it's fun and it's really nice to watch on tape. But when things get faster, windows get smaller, a lot neck up, which is, it's hard to, it's hard to know exactly how a guy's made up and how things are going to look. And I think clearly Zach Wilson was overrated in the process,
Sure.
being, somewhat of a trick shot artist. But you could say the same thing. You could say the same thing about Bryce Young, is like, you just don't know. And you're going to put all your eggs in that basket.
Mm-hmm.
It's just tough for me with Bryce Young. As much as I like him as a prospect, if you're sitting there at pick 9 and he falls to you, you turn in the card. You can't turn it in fast enough. But spending 3 first-round picks to go up and get Bryce Young is where I think it starts to get a little bit dicey. And I don't know if I believe in any of these. I like a lot of these quarterback prospects, and they all have a lot of strengths. I don't know if I'd be convicted about any of them enough to really bet my job on it, basically.
From what I know now, I'm with you. I'm not real impressed with the class overall. Last Bears nugget I wanted to say before was, I know a lot of Bears fans are like, yeah, we're going to trade down, but I don't want to trade away from Anderson or Carter. I only want to stay in the top 4. To your point, I think it's more important to emerge from that trade with future firsts than it is to stay in the top 4.
I would agree. And I would think also, because of the asking price, it'll
get a lot for this year.
In a way, it'll work itself out, because if you get an offer that's good enough to trade past 4, that means it's a crazy offer, and
you're getting a lot. Right. Yeah.
And if not, then that means you still get Anderson or Carter, and you still got something in return, which is also good. So it's almost a no-lose situation for the Bears.
Right. I think sticking and picking at 1 is almost the lose.
That's the lose, right?
Yeah.
And
cool.
and the lose would be if nobody values the pick enough to even give you a decent enough offer. And in the end, we're talking about to give some hints about a future mock draft. I think still the most likely trade is for the Bears to end up at 2, because it won't cost 3 first-round picks like it would for the Panthers.
You might only get the first pick in the 3rd round and a 3rd rounder next year, but you weren't going to take them anyways. You still get your guy. Everybody's happy.
It's free picks. You get the same guy you were going to get.
Right.
And then potentially even you get another deal there, because now it's like, okay, we got to get in front of 4. So maybe you could do trade. And maybe maybe that's the biggest payoff for the Bears, is they move down with the Texans, then move down again with the Panthers.
Yeah, there's only one guy off the board, but people adore Stroud or whatever. I mean, we're still open for business, but
what if here's I take it back. Here's the ideal scenario for the Bears. You trade down to 2, and then the Colts still want to make sure they get up to 2 to thwart another team going in front of them. So you trade down twice, you get down to 4, you get more than if you went from 1 to 4, because you went from 1 to 2 to 4. And then you still get your guy on the defensive side of the ball, and you have all the extra picks that you got.
Yeah, you probably don't end up with a future first, but you're picking 4 with a bunch of 2nds and 3rds over the next couple of years, which, boy, do you need.
And on top of that, Justin Fields turns out to be the star that you hope he is.
Yeah, and you assume the Texans will stink. The Colts probably won't be very good, so they'll be early picks. I mean, I don't think either one's winning the Super Bowl. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So then that way, you're choosing between Caleb Williams and
Justin Fields,
Marvin Harrison Jr. next year.
Yeah. Right. And the Fields made it great, and you have those cap space in the league.
Fantastic stuff. Let us know what you think at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter. We've got combine coverage coming up. We've got Matt Williamson's annual draft ditties, 1 draft note on every team in the NFL.
And BP, what you do is you take one of those 3rds and send it to Arizona for DeAndre Hopkins.
Oh, I love that.
You got all these extra 3rds. Give one to Arizona. Let Fields throw it up to that guy. Give him a real receiver. Yeah, who misses a 3rd?
There's much better free agent tackles than ends. So I go Will Anderson in the draft, and I'm signing Deron Payne or Javon Hargrave.
Yeah.
And you could revamp the line overnight.
Yep. I like it.
Love it. That would be so fun to be the Chicago Bears. I envy Ryan Poles. This is a fun situation for him to be in right now. Important. The most important offseason in Chicago Bears history. You
could be. Absolutely. Picking first overall. They're regretting that Claypool trade, though.
Yeah, they are. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Back tomorrow right here. Peacock and Williamson.